right, good morning, everybody. I'm Bethany Bruner with the Columbus Dispatch, joined by my colleague here, Dean Narciso, and we have been following two of the most high-profile cases that Franklin County has seen in recent history. We are on verdict watch in both of those cases, so we thought we'd take some time to answer reader questions about these trials. The trial of former Columbus Police Officer Andrew Mitchell, who's charged with murder in connection with the August 23rd, 2018 shooting death of Donna Castleberry, and the trial of William Husel, a former Mount Carmel doctor who's accused of giving high doses of pain medicine to patients in the ICU that have resulted in 14 charges of murder. Dean and I have both been following the Husel case. I've been following the Mitchell case. It's been a long few weeks. We're standing here in the first floor of the Franklin County Courthouse as we wait for those verdicts. We just left not long ago the Husel courtroom. Dean, do you want to kind of give us a recap of where we are in that case?
Sure. The jury has received their instructions on Tuesday morning, and they subsequently got the case to deliberate on, and so they've been in and out of their deliberations for several days now. They have had, I think, 3 questions so far, and they've been largely about the evidence that they can review. So there's certain types of evidence that have been submitted. These are, turned in, and there's a big cart that is filled with documents and other evidence. And so they've questioned if certain things are permissible to review that haven't been submitted as evidence. And they've been told that, hey, they've got all the evidence, that physical evidence that they're going to get. And so as of now, it's a lot of just waiting around and discussing the case with our colleagues and hoping that there's going to be a verdict at some point that is just and fair.
Yeah, so we know that jury, the jury in the Husel case is not going to be deliberating on Friday. They have made that determination. That sticks with the schedule that they have kept to for much of this trial, which began in mid-February with jury selection. Actually, the first day of jury selection was on Valentine's Day. So we're at the 2-month mark exactly on that case. They have been going Monday through Thursday in terms of hearing evidence throughout the course of this trial, and they're sticking to that schedule. Our understanding is that some of the jurors work on the weekends, so being able to have that time on Fridays is helpful to them. And for the Mitchell case, we had testimony begin last week. We are now waiting again for the verdict in that case. They received their charge yesterday morning, began deliberating after lunch, and broke for the day after about 2 hours of deliberation, resuming about 9 a.m. today. They also had some questions this morning about the evidence that they could review in that case, and there was a very spirited discussion as to the legal definition of conduct amongst the lawyers on that case, with the judge ultimately ruling that no legal definition was going to be given to the jury. So as we wait for the verdicts, we're going to get notified of the verdict through a unique system in the courtrooms here at the Franklin County Courthouse. They have lights that are attached and wired to the jury room, so that light is red when the light is red when they're deliberating, red and green simultaneously when they are on a break, and then green solid when they have a verdict. So again, drop your questions in the comments. We'll get to those. We've got our first one here. We've got our producer, Doral, here, who can pass those to us. First question is, have there been nurses attending in the Husel audience? And I know the time that I have been there, not that I recognized, a lot of nurses, former nurses testified. The one nurse that we have seen nearly every day is Husel's wife, Mariah, who has been by his side throughout this.
Yeah, there have been 12, as I counted them, there were 12 nurses who testified. 9 of them were males, 3 female, and interestingly, they all, almost to each one, had very complimentary things to say about the former doctor. He was compassionate, he was helpful, he educated them when they had questions, he was willing to take criticism. So what was striking to me about those who did testify, many of them, several actually, were newly minted nurses, so they didn't have a whole lot of experience. They did defer to him in a lot of matters, especially in the dispensing of medication. So they didn't question, how much is too much. But they all had very, very nice things to say about the doctor who was the only doctor working in the ICU on the third shift at Mount Carmel at the time. He was the only ICU in charge. So they really had to, had to defer to him and look up to him as a mentor and as a leader.
Absolutely. And Doral, what are some of the other questions that we've got rolling in here? We'll get one of those from you. All right, we're coming across 3 different platforms. So I think that's YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, if I'm not correct. This question, is Husel's wife guilty of helping him? This is one, she has not been charged with any crime in connection to this. She was involved in administering medication to one patient that is not among the 14 counts that the former doctor is currently facing. At the beginning of this process, when this all first came to light, there were nearly 36 patients that were identified by Mount Carmel as being involved. There were civil lawsuits filed. We're going back to the early 2019 pre-pandemic and when all of this kind of came to light. His wife was one of the nurses who was disciplined by the state nursing board. Her license was revoked, but she has not been charged criminally with anything related to this case, and she is not involved in any of the 14 counts that are still pending.
You might note that she has been in court every day. She sits in the same section of the court, right behind her husband. She has a small group of friends. Sometimes it ebbs and flows, the number that show up, but she enters the courthouse and leaves the courthouse with her husband, hand in hand, and seems to be very comfortable, in that setting.
All right, and this question I'll take as well about the Mitchell case. Why was Andrew Mitchell out on Sullivan Avenue in the first place back in August 2018? We know through the testimony that has come through in court that he was working undercover as a vice officer, and his unit within the vice squad had decided to work on the west side that day. They began work around 11 that morning in the Hilltop area, Franklinton. It's commonly kind of referred to as the Bottoms, and then that is where he picked up Ms. Castleberry on Sullivan Avenue. They drove to that area off Bellows and Yale, and within 10 minutes of their meeting, all of the events had occurred that led us to the courthouse today. What else you got for us, Doral? Okay. How many men and women are on the jury? So for the Mitchell case, we know there's a pool of 14. We do not know which 2 are the alternates, but the pool itself is 10 women and 4 men. So we don't know which 2 are the alternates, but that pool of 14 is 10 and 4. The Husel jury has had quite a few changes over the last 2 months. We've had jurors have to leave the trial due to various circumstances. So I know all 4 alternates in that case are women. But I don't know, Dean, do you have a sense of what the actual makeup of the 12 that are deliberating is?
I've been sitting kind of side by side, so directly behind the plexiglass that separates the jurors. So I'm looking at them, not face to face, but kind of the profile. And I've not done a count. I believe that there are more females than men, but I don't have an exact count. And it's hard, frankly, to judge, who, or to determine which are the alternates and which are the 12 on a case.
Yeah, I know the original makeup of that was 7 women, 5 men, and then obviously we've had quite a few changes, so it's unclear exactly what we're doing in terms of that makeup at this point. We will have a better sense when they come in for a verdict. This is a fun question. What do you do while you're waiting on the jury verdict, and what do the judges do? I can say Judge Young, who's presiding over the Mitchell case, has been handling other cases. I watched 2 plea hearings this morning in his courtroom for completely unrelated matters. And I think Judge Holbrook is just kind of passing the time. He had cleared most of his docket for this trial. But Dean, what have you been doing while we wait for these verdicts?
There's a lot of just sitting and waiting and reviewing the story that you've pre-written in anticipation of the verdict. it's a good way to catch up with colleagues. It's a good way to meet, new people that you haven't in the media, haven't seen for a while. Occasionally you do meet, and meet with the judge. When he's off the bench, he'll chat with you and he'll discuss, just matters of the day, things that could be related to the court or not. Interesting, he's been watching, and occasionally he will watch a crime show while he's sitting and waiting. So he's much more interesting than us in terms of he has things to do that aren't necessarily work-related. But true crime is apparently his passion, and he'll discuss events of the day along the way.
I know, the media room is right here behind us, and we've got two sets of reporters here covering these two high-profile cases. There's a lot of conversation catching up, but we're also doing a lot of work. There's a lot of preparation that goes into awaiting a verdict and having essentially two separate stories ready to go depending on what that verdict might be. We obviously don't know because we're not in that jury room. So this question, if he is found not guilty, will Husel return to medicine? What we know is that his license in the state of Ohio has been revoked as a part of the state medical board's proceedings against him. That does not necessarily preclude him from returning to medicine in another state. That would be something, I think that's something we all want to ask him if the verdict is not guilty and he's willing to talk to the media, is what his plans are in terms of his medical career.
And the question could be, could he return to some form of medicine that doesn't require a license? I'm not sure about getting his license back. Should he be vindicated in this matter? But what that process is. But he could return to, some type of health care. His wife is a nurse, and so they could do a variety of things.
And a reminder, you can drop your questions in the chat portion on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube as we're broadcasting live here from the courthouse. This question, Husel is an anesthesiologist, so why was he in the emergency room? Well, for starters, he was in the intensive care unit, not the emergency room. Those are two separate areas. We want to make that clear. But the ICU, my understanding from our reporting back in 2019 when all of this kind of was coming to light was that he wanted to be an anesthesiologist and had done that training, but through that training had really discovered a passion for helping people in the ICU. I believe we even quoted a hearing at one point before the state medical board as he was getting his licensure about that was his passion, was treating sick patients in the ICU. So that is where he was ultimately hired in 2013 by the Mount Carmel Health Systems. He worked at both St. Anne's and Mount Carmel West, I believe primarily Mount Carmel West, and would help at St. Anne's as necessary on that third shift.
Just because you have a specialty doesn't mean you can't work in various areas of the hospital.
Absolutely,
absolutely. He's an MD or osteopath?
I believe he has a DO, osteopathic
doctor
medicine.
of osteopathy. So he, technically, just because he has a specialty, whether it's radiology or whatever, anesthesiology, he can work.
Yeah.
One commentator who says his wife's license was not revoked, it was suspended with probation.
Okay, so his wife's license was suspended without permission. Thank you, commenter. We try and keep tabs on all of those, but obviously I am not a nurse, so my reading of that may have been skewed. So thank you very much. What happened to the Vice Squad? Well, I don't know that we have enough time to go through everything that has happened since this shooting took place in August 2018, but I'll try and give you the Cliff Notes version here. Following that shooting, the shooting of Donna Castleberry in the fall of 2018, that had occurred about 6 weeks after the arrest of Stephanie Clifford, who also goes by the name Stormy Daniels here in Columbus, also by the Vice Squad. Andrew Mitchell was not involved in that arrest, but it was the same squad of officers. Those two events combined and the attention that those brought upon the unit prompted then Chief Kim Jacobs of the Columbus Police Department to request the FBI's Public Corruption Task Force to get involved with an investigation. As a result of that investigation, ultimately there were two other officers, I believe, that were federally indicted for various crimes. Those cases have since been resolved. One officer was acquitted on all charges. The other was found guilty of one and is awaiting sentencing. The Vice Squad itself was disbanded and replaced with the Police and Community Together team that the Columbus Police use now to work on human trafficking cases and take a different kind of approach to the traditional what we have seen in terms of arresting prostitutes and taking them to jail. It's more of a different approach, giving them more wraparound services. I think Dean and I, we've both covered events that they have held and been a part of that. So long story short, they're not around anymore in the same form.
And the Vice Squad, I've been here a bit longer than Bethany, for years, for decades, has always been kind of one of those units of the police department that works behind the scenes. Obviously, they do undercover work. And there's always been suspicion, on and off about their performance and how the tactics that they use to do their jobs. But we do have one more question. It's a question related to the nurses and pharmacists in the Husel case and whether they will be charged criminally. And that's a question kind of related to Mariah Husel, whether she will be. We don't really have a way of knowing. They have lost their licenses, both their pharmacy and the nursing licenses. So, in a sense, they've been punished fairly severely. A lot of them have gone into other fields. Some have stayed in healthcare, but in speaking to some of the witnesses, many have gone into just completely different careers. Whether they will be criminally charged, I guess, is still up in the air at this point. We don't really know.
Yeah, initially we knew that there weren't plans to charge them, but there was a different prosecutor in office at the time, and the statute of limitations for a felony is 6 years. So that's ultimately up to the prosecution what they want to do. How did the recording of Donna Castleberry's death get recorded? This is a great question. So Andrew Mitchell had a city-issued cell phone that all police officers are given one through the city, and the policy was to record any encounter they had with a suspected prostitute so that they could then prove what happened if the case went to court and said, oh no, I didn't offer anything for money, or there wasn't an exchange. It was a way to capture the interaction. So he had started that recording prior to her even approaching his vehicle, and that recording ultimately is what has been played in court numerous times over the last 2 weeks. So Dora, do we have other questions coming in? Oh, we're losing paper here. Okay.
So why did Mitchell back his car into a light pole?
Okay, why did he back his car into a light pole? He actually had parked his vehicle against the side of a building, of an apartment building. It wasn't a light pole, but this is a tactic that, we heard a lot of testimony about this during the trial, that Vice and undercover officers would use when they were arresting women to avoid, they do that with the passenger side of the vehicle facing a light pole, a tree, a building. Right. Yes, to block someone in, so that if they decide, oh no, I don't want to go to jail, they could not open that door and get out and run away. Several of the officers said that, they're a little older and maybe couldn't run quite as fast as they could in their younger days. But that's a tactic that we heard that is not even specific to Columbus Police, that's an undercover tactic that was used in policing around the country. Okay.
The producer's going to ask this question. I understand the defense filed for a mistrial in the Husel case. True or false? Under what grounds? Did it have anything to do with the motion to have the judge replaced?
Those are all good questions. There were multiple motions for mistrial. I believe at last count I had 3 that had been made by the defense throughout the course of the 2 months, so that is definitely true. Those motions have largely had to do with procedural issues. A witness made a comment. I believe there was one witness that made a comment that they believed was prejudicial enough that it would have been cause for a mistrial in the defense's mind. I think there were some comments by the prosecutor at one point. None of them have been specifically related to that affidavit of disqualification. I'm sure there may have been discussion behind closed doors that the media was not privy to that may have also been surrounding that issue. Hopefully we'll learn more about some of that and the reasoning behind those motions.
There was one attempt to, this is by the defense, to the claim was that the prosecution was shifting the burden of proof. The prosecution has the burden of proof, or the state does, to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that someone's guilty, in this case of intentional murder. And they were by the questions they were asking and challenging of the defense, they were shifting that burden effectively to the defense, which as a rule of law you can't do. So it was an interesting challenge, and the judge acknowledged that he understood why that would be a problem, but he said it was not significant enough to cause a mistrial.
And all of these things that the defense has brought up, many times we see in trials, it's a motion they know may not be granted, but they have to make it for the purposes of the record. Should there be a need for an appeal, they need to have at least made note of that during the course of the proceeding. So some of the time the defense, I think, stands up knowing that maybe these are going to get overruled, but they just have to make their record of it. And I think we saw that a lot, particularly in the Husel case, Judge Holbrook allowing them, when the jury was out of the room, to make their record of various objections and things throughout the course of a trial, as you will have over a 2-month proceeding.
And these also could be used in the event of an appeal, and likely would, depending on how the case goes for either side. You kind of build up your case for objections, you put them on the record, and then if the trial verdict doesn't go in your favor, you can use those as part of your appeal to appeal the case to another court.
Absolutely. This question, will we get a verdict before or after Columbus first responders get their $1,000 hero pay? This is a story I've been following as well. I have to say, firefighters have gotten theirs. My understanding is the police union has also agreed to a memorandum of understanding. So if you're a first responder and didn't get that, maybe talk to your union about that. And that might be, my understanding is that's been handled. So I think the answer is before.
Yeah, we have a question. Does the court notify the media when there's a verdict, and can you leave the building? Yes, you can leave the building, but you have to be on a fairly short leash. The judge has told us that he's got about a half-hour window to try to get everybody in. Obviously, you want the defendant there, so you can't have a long lunch. It's one of the challenges of a verdict watch, is that you got to stay really close and wait for those. There's lights that go on, as Bethany said, in the courtroom that would indicate that there's a verdict, and that's when the adrenaline starts pumping, and you run and get your gear and try to prepare your questions, and it can get pretty tense and hectic.
And I will say compliments to the bailiffs in both of these cases. They have been very good about communicating with us as the media in terms of when there's a question, if the red and green lights mean they're on lunch, if that means there's a question, if there's a break, when they're leaving for the day, when they're starting for the day, to really help keep us informed. So we are very appreciative of that. This question, who is Jose Baez? So Baez is former Dr. Husel's lead counsel on the defense team. He is not originally from Ohio. He's from the Florida area. He gained notoriety more than a decade ago now by defending Casey Anthony in that case. I'm sure just saying that name brings a lot of memories for people. That case was a national story at the time. He also has defended clients like Aaron Hernandez up in Boston, and has handled, he's been on TV and had a number of other appearances. He's a legal expert that's commonly comments on cases around the country. He's
based in Orlando, and he has a large law firm. They do a lot of advertising. He's a very, if you're watching any of this trial, he can be very colorful. He's what you call a conceptual, gives conceptual arguments, discussing lofty principles behind the law, and very interesting man to listen to, and he can really captivate a jury during closing arguments.
Absolutely, and I know he may speak with the media after there's a verdict, depending on how that verdict comes down, and we'll have a chance to talk to him a little bit about why he took this case in particular. That's something he really hasn't addressed a lot publicly, as to what drew him to the Husel case and why that was something that really caught his attention.
One of the questions we'd have for him is, the defense did rest after calling just one witness, and it was not unprecedented in murder cases that happens. Sometimes you just rely on the prosecution to prove their case, and if you don't feel they did, there's no reason to call any witnesses. We don't know what the strategy is, so that would be one question that we'd like to have answered among many.
Yes, so to say the list is long for both sides in that particular case. In the Husel case, does a case like this make people mistrust the medical profession? I think it might be too early to really know what the impact of this case is going to have. I think the verdict may have an impact on how medicine is practiced in intensive care units, particularly around those palliative extubations and end-of-life care. Maybe that becomes more of a hospice issue than an ICU issue. I don't know that it necessarily has caused people to mistrust. I think people have become a lot more educated about the decisions that may be needed at end of life and decisions that maybe they want to make preemptively before any of those tragic situations might arise with end of life care. I know this is something you and I were talking about the other day as we were on Verdict Watch, is what this has made us think about in terms of parents and ourselves even.
Everybody's going to face these questions, whether you're your own or a loved one's, and that's what makes the trial so interesting and so poignant for so many people to watch, because we're all going to face end of life, and what the process is and how it happens and whether you're in a hospital or not. There are questions about how you should be treated with respect and of course in a hospital with proper protocols. So that's what this case is really relying on, a lot of those lofty ethical questions versus practical common sense.
Absolutely. So this question, Husel admits he did it. How is he not guilty? I don't know, do you want to tackle that one? You want me to?
Well, he didn't admit he did anything. He didn't admit that he intentionally caused the death of 14 of his patients. So that's a little bit of a misnomer. If he admits that he was providing compassionate care, which is the dispensing of medication that would ease the pain and suffering and anxiety for patients who were terminally ill, then I think he might say he's guilty of that.
Yeah, that has been the defense's argument throughout this case from the very beginning, is that nothing that he did was criminal in nature. It was all providing that end-of-life comfort care to allow people to die peacefully and with dignity and pain-free, or as pain-free as one could hope to be.
Right.
Why 14 cases and not 25?
Why 14 cases and not 25? That's a good question. We originally started with 25 counts in the indictment. Earlier this year in January, 11 of those counts were dismissed at the prosecution's request. That is something when County Prosecutor Gary Tyack took over. Former prosecutor Ron O'Brien had indicted the case as 25 counts. So that was something when Prosecutor Tyack took over that his office felt, I believe the quote at one point was, he has only one life he can spend in prison should he be convicted.
One of the strongest cases, and that's why we have 14. These are the ones that they felt they could get convictions on, and anything else was essentially overkill.
Yes, and the patients that were the 14 that are left, I think the smallest dose of fentanyl involved in those cases is 500 micrograms. Some of those 11 were, I think, 200 and 300. There might have been a couple 500 in there. So,
and that dosage, by the way, is 10 times what is recommended, considered the normal dosage of fentanyl. So it's ranged from 500 up to 2,000, which is 20 times the dosage that some medical experts would say, most medical experts would say is appropriate for this type of end-of-life care.
All right. How is the Husel prosecution doing? I think they're anxious right now, awaiting a verdict like all of us. But in terms of how they did presenting their case, I mean, this is a complicated case. You've got 14 patients, 14 sets of medical records, 14 families that are testifying, medical experts, and medical testimony is complicated. You have to boil that down so that somebody like us who does not have a medical degree can understand it and then relay that through our stories and our reporting.
How many witnesses would they have?
I believe they had 53 witnesses by my count that they called to the stand to testify. So it was a long, grueling case for them. I don't know that we want to opine on how they did or didn't do, how either side did or didn't do in their case. That's not really our place. We're more focused on what the facts are and what they did, but they did call a lot of witnesses.
And just because you're calling a lot of witnesses doesn't mean that, the other side, which only called one witness, isn't working just as hard, because you've got to respond to everything that's said in court, usually with objections and strenuous defense.
Yeah, the lawyers on all sides of this have to think very quickly and on their feet as they're in court every day. It's a lot for them to handle, and I think everybody at the end of this is going to just heave a big sigh of relief that it's over and they can, their brain can rest for a little bit.
Back to the fentanyl question, Mike says only the 11, they range between 500 and 900.
Okay, they range between 500 and 900. Thank you again. There's a lot of information for us to process, and our brains, maybe aren't as good as what we think they are sometimes. So thank you for that, Mike. All right, this will be our last question.
Somebody wants us to play.
Oh, somebody wants us to be on that jury. Okay, are they guilty? I don't know that that's our place. We are not in that jury room. All we can tell you is what has been reported and testified to within the courtroom.
I would have to agree. The question is, are they guilty? Is he guilty? Is the ultimate question. But I think that's why we're waiting here, kind of on pins and needles to see.
Yeah, both of these cases are very complicated legally, and there's a lot for those juries to consider. So we're going to wrap it up here now. Thank you guys for joining us. If you have other questions, feel free to submit them. Maybe we'll get a chance to do this again, depending on how quickly those juries come back. And the best way to send one of those questions, you can just email me. It's B as in boy, then a second B, R-U, N as in Nancy, E-R, @dispatch.com. And I'll try to get back to you as much as I can while we're waiting here. We are working on some other things, but thank you guys for tuning in, and be sure to keep up on all of the latest updates in these cases and subscribe to the Dispatch. All of that is available at dispatch.com. And we will have, and as Doral just reminded us, we will be live when the Husel verdict in particular comes down. There will be a live stream of that. We're still working out what the details might be on the Mitchell case.
Be from within the courtroom. So
right, we'll be from within the courtroom.
Reaction and as we see it.
Yes, you'll get to see everything in real time. So thank you guys so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and make sure to subscribe to the Dispatch.